Welcome to the 2025 election results recap episode of Olmsted Overheard. The votes are in and the numbers tell the story. Olmsted Falls and Olmsted Township voters went to the polls yesterday, November 4th, 2025, and while you might have seen the results posted online already, here on Olmsted Overheard, I'm going to break down the data for you. For my listeners on Spotify, this might be an episode to check out over on YouTube, as I'm going to show some charts and whatnot to highlight some of the numbers. So if you like visualizations, check this out on YouTube this time. So, like I said, now's the time to break down the data for you. Were there any tight races? Were there any sweeps of all the precincts? For my day job, I work with data modeling and analytics software, so this is where I get to nerd out. If you like the numbers like I do, tune in. This is your host, Mark McCausland. Let's get into it. This is Olmsted Overheard. Real quick, I'll put timestamps for the different breakdowns in the description of the podcast episode. So if you just want to hear me dig into one particular race, check that out. Also, if you want to crunch the numbers yourselves, I will post the links to the sources I used in the episode descriptions too. Data nerds, unite. All right, now turning to the results themselves. First, I want to take a moment and break down voter turnout numbers. Out of the 58 cities or municipalities in Cuyahoga County, Olmsted Falls ranked a solid 14th place with over 35% voter turnout. Nice job, Falls residents. And while this might sound low to some, 35%, this is actually very strong turnout for a local election in an off year nationally. Now, the township, on the other hand, only 20.3%, which put them at rank 48 out of those 58 municipalities in the county. I want to give an extra big shout out to the top 3 precincts. Both precincts in Olmsted Falls Ward 2 hit those top 3, along with Ward 3 Precinct 3A. So Olmsted Falls Precinct 2A came in with over 41% voter turnout. Next was Precinct 3A with 39.2% turnout, and then 2B at 38.9%. The largest turnout in the township, by contrast, was Precinct B with 28.7%. Now, let's dig into the individual races and their results, and we'll start with probably the big one, the race for mayor of Olmsted Falls. Chad Gluss is the winner, pulling in around 55% of the vote against Holly Newman's 45%. By raw numbers, Gluss took 1,283 votes compared to Newman's 1,036, meaning Chad Gluss won by 247 votes. When you look at it more granularly, Mr. Gluss won in each of the 8 precincts within Olmsted Falls. The margins themselves varied, but the results really weren't super tight for this one. The closest precinct-level race was in Ward 3, Precinct 3A, where Mr. Gluss won by 15 votes, which was less than a 3% margin. At the ward level, Ward 2 was the closest, with Gluss winning by 32 votes, or 4.8%. But then you have Ward 4, where Mr. Gluss won by 116 votes, or 22% of the vote in that ward. So at the end of the day, while winning by under 250 votes might sound tight, in a town our size, that's still a 10% victory margin. So, the new mayor of Olmsted Falls will be Chad Gluss. The next race to unpack will be Olmsted Falls City Council. We'll start with the council at-large seats, where 3 seats were up for election and 4 candidates were running. 2 incumbents, Megan Coy and Brian Chittister, and 2 challengers, Jennifer Jansen and Gary Thompson. Looking at the results, the 3 seats go to incumbent Megan Coy, and then challengers Jennifer Jansen and Gary Thompson. Incumbent Brian Chittister only got around 17% of the vote, so he will no longer be on council come the new year. Incumbent Megan Coy led the vote with 29.8% overall, and Jen Jansen pulled in around 25 more votes than Gary Thompson citywide, each of them getting between 26 and 27% of the vote. Ward by ward, the results were pretty similar. Megan Coy took the most votes in each ward and in each precinct, But there were a couple precincts here and there where Gary Thompson took more votes than Jennifer Jansen. But regardless, they're both in. Brian Chittister pulled in the least number of votes no matter which precinct or ward you look at. So to recap, your council at large reps come January will be Megan Coyne, Jennifer Jansen, and Gary Thompson. Now we will look at the ward-by-ward city council races for Olmsted Falls. Only one ward race was contested, which was Ward 2, so I will save that breakdown for last. But I will recap the results for the other wards. For Ward 1, the councilperson will be Anita Greller, who, again, ran unopposed. She pulled in 245 votes. In Ward 3, Brett Iafiola will be your rep, who also ran unopposed. He took in 437 votes. And for Ward 4, again, running unopposed, the councilperson will be Scott Sari, who pulled in 342 votes. Now, for the race for Ward 2, the winner is Jacqueline Bartkowski. Bartkowski took in a little over 56% of the votes in Ward 2 and won by 68 votes over incumbent Sean Wolanin. Jacqueline Bartkowski won in both precincts of Ward 2, but with a noticeably larger margin in Precinct 2A. So, Ward 2 listeners, your council rep for your ward will be Jacqueline Bartkowski. Moving over to Olmsted Township, up for election were 2 trustee positions and 3 people running for them. Incumbent Riley Alton, challenger Bob Perez, a current school board member, and challenger Chris Anagnostopoulos. The 2 seats go to incumbent Riley Alton and then Bob Perez. Alton and Perez were neck and neck, not just overall, but also precinct by precinct, for the most part. Riley Alton pulled in 39.4% of the vote, and Bob Perez eked out a win, so to speak, with 40% of the vote. Overall, Perez got 22 more votes than Alton, with 1,381 votes over Alton's 1,359. Mr. Anagnostopoulos only took 711 votes township-wide, or just over 20% of the vote. Now, both Perez and Alton win the seats, but the battle between them was super close. Technically, Riley Alton edged out a victory in 7 of the 9 precincts, but the margins here were all very slim. In precincts C, E, and H, Alton only won by 2 votes each. And then in precinct A, he won by 3, and then the margins vary from there. But his largest lead came from precinct B by only 21 votes. Mr. Perez, on the other hand, won both precincts F and G. He won G by 14 votes, but had a hefty margin in precinct F, winning by 50 votes. So that margin in precinct F carried Mr. Perez to snag the most votes overall for the township, but again, he only eked out a first-place victory by 22 votes. So township residents, your trustees from this election are the returning Riley Alton and newcomer Bob Perez. And that leaves us with the votes for school board. Technically, this was an unopposed race because there were 3 people vying for 3 open seats. So the 3 school board members from this election are, with 39% of the vote, Amy Lauderdale, with 32% of the vote, Phil Eckenrode, and Patrick Antos with around 29% of the vote. Precinct by precinct, Amy Lauderdale won pretty handily across the board. Second place was generally taken by Phil Eckenrode, but Mr. Antos did snag second place in Olmsted Falls Ward 4, Precinct 4B, and in Olmsted Township, Precinct B. So that's school board. Unopposed, the 3 school board members from this election, Amy Lauderdale, Phil Eckenrode, and Patrick Antos. And that's a wrap on the races for local positions within the governments of Olmsted Falls and Olmsted Township. Also worth noting, there were 3 tax levy renewals on the ballot in the falls for police, fire, and streets. Again, these were tax renewals, so not new tax levies, and all 3 of these passed by pretty significant margins, ranging from 68% for police to 74% for fire and 72% for streets. None of the precinct-specific results were wildly different from those numbers, so I will call that a wrap on the Data Deep Dive here for 2025 Election Day. I hope some of you fellow data nerds out there enjoyed this breakdown. I know I think it's interesting to look at the actual numbers, and a couple of the big takeaways for me after looking at the details are: 1. Props to Olmsted Falls voters. 35% turnout, while it might sound low, is actually pretty dang good for this type of election. 2. None of the races were really incredibly tight. The closest race in my eyes was between Bob Perez and Riley Alton for first place for Township Trustee, but they both win seats, so it's kind of a moot competition. I know a lot of people expected the Olmsted Falls mayoral race to be pretty tight, but in the end, Chad Gluss won in every precinct and overall won by around 10% of the vote. And 3, I hope a takeaway for everybody that stayed with me this long in this episode is this. Because of the size of our towns, both in the Falls and the Township, every vote matters. When we look at the national level or even the state level, things win by thousands and millions of votes. But here, locally, a couple of hundred votes can be utterly game-changing. So, remember this, listeners. Voting local matters. And thank you all for listening. If you liked this data-driven episode, let me know in the comments or reach out to me. And don't forget to like, follow, share, and tell your friends about this local-focused podcast. I'm your host, Mark McCausland, and this has been Olmsted Overheard.